Hi, my name is Richard Porter, and I direct the Office of International Student and Scholar Services here at Texas Tech University. Thank you for watching this presentation on optional practical training. Please note that there's a lot of information on our website. You will want to watch this presentation and then review that information on our website before you make your appointment with your international student advisor. In this presentation, we will talk about some of the basic information about OPT, how to apply for OPT, the rules regarding unemployment during your 12 months of OPT, some of the reporting requirements during your 12 months of OPT, and then we'll cover some frequently asked questions. Let's begin with the basics of OPT. OPT is a temporary type of work authorization, and it lasts for 12 months. And during those 12 months, you are still an F1 student. You are still in F1 status. You get one period of OPT after the completion of each degree level. So if you were to complete a bachelor's degree, you would get 12 months of OPT, and then if you went on and did a master's degree, then you would be able to participate in OPT one more time after you complete your master's degree. An important rule is that employment during your OPT, and in order to qualify for OPT, the work that you will do will have to be related to the major that you just completed, the degree you just completed. So if you are a chemical engineer, if you were to apply for OPT, you would only be able to work as a chemical engineer for an employer here in the US. After you apply for OPT, you apply to the US government, and then you wait, and until you get a card from the government, it's called an employment authorization document, you would not be able to begin your OPT. So you apply to the government, and they send you a card in the mail, and then after you get that card, then you can work on OPT. Now, you do not need an offer of employment before you apply for OPT. So remember, you have to apply early, but at the time that you apply for your OPT, you do not need a job offer letter. However, it's important that you note that during your OPT, after you've been approved for your EAD card, you cannot remain in the US legally for more than 90 days. Your OPT start date is determined by the card and what the start date on that card is. So from the start date on the card until the end of your 12 months, you cannot be unemployed in the US for more than 90 days. So it's important that you report your employer information in the SEVIS portal, the SEVIS student portal, so that you do not begin accruing that 90 days of unemployment. There are different types of OPT, not really types, but there's a different additional amount of OPT that you can get after a degree. This is referred to as STEM OPT. It's an additional 24 months that only students in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math are eligible. So if you are in those fields, then you can apply for an additional 12 months of OPT. So a total of 36 months. We're not going to talk about STEM OPT in this presentation. There is another presentation available on our website that talks about STEM OPT. So just go to our website and look for the STEM OPT, but this is only relevant after you finish your first 12 months, near the end of that, and then only for students in the majors of science, technology, engineering, and math. So here are some of the things you need to know about how you will apply for OPT. A lot more information is available on our website, but briefly, here are some of the things that you will need to apply for OPT. You will need a variety of forms, including the optional practical training acknowledgement form. That's a form that was created by our office. You will need these government forms, the G1145 and the I-765, and you will need an academic advisor's recommendation form. When you send the application in, some of the things that you will need to include in the application will be copies of any previous EADs, a copy of your valid passport bio page, and a copy of your I-94. Some of the other items that you will need will include 2 color passport photos from the past 30 days. You can have those photos taken here in the International Cultural Center or at any of the pharmacies in in the city of Lubbock, such as Walgreens or CVS. And then finally, you will need a check or money order made out to the Department of Homeland Security. So here is a timeline for your OPT application. You can apply, and you should apply, up to 90 days prior to the end of your program. It takes a while for the government agency to send you your EAD, your document, so you send this application off to the government. So it's important that you apply early, and you can apply and should apply 90 days before you graduate. You will choose as your start date sometime within 60 days after you complete your degree. So look at this timeline and then apply. The key to take away here is that you do not want to apply late for your OPT. And then you'll have to work on what you choose as your start date. And we'll talk about that. But just remember that you cannot work until after you get the card in the mail from the government and after the start date that you have chosen for your OPT that will appear on that employment authorization, on your OPT card. So you will need to choose a start date, and that decision will be made by you, but you have that conversation with your international student counselor and think through your circumstances. You will need to, though, choose a start date during those 60 days. Now, sometimes we have graduate students, and only in the case of a graduate student on dissertation, they can apply before they finish their degree, but we don't recommend that. For most students, you will choose as your start date sometime within 60 days after you finish your degree, and there are various things you need to consider in that decision as to when that start date will be. Did you apply early or late for OPT? That will impact sometimes what start date you choose. But remember, we recommend that you apply early for your OPT, and you can avoid that dilemma. Do you want to work right away, or would you like to take some time off during those 60 days? That's another consideration. And then you need to think through, will it be difficult or easy for me to find a job? And so maybe you'll choose as your start date towards the end of those 60 days so that you have more time to find employment. It's ultimately your choice, but you will think through these different factors and have a conversation with your international student advisor and then choose your start date. There are some very important reporting requirements while you are on OPT. You must report any employment or change of employment, the details of that, company name, address, start date, in the SEVIS student portal. During your 12 months of OPT, you must also report in this portal any changes in your physical address, where you are living. And then finally, when you apply for OPT, you will put as your address where you would like them to deliver the card, your home address. And so that card will go to that home address, so you need to make sure that that address is accurate in SEVIS. And then after you get your card, you need to send a copy of that EAD/OPT card to your international student counselor. One of the real common questions that we get about OPT is whether or not it's okay to do volunteer work while you are on OPT. Now, sometimes students do not get a job right away, and there's an opportunity to volunteer, and that is a way to be here and continue to be here legally so that you are not accruing unemployment time. So yes, you can. You can volunteer while you are on your OPT, but all of the rules regarding OPT still apply. For example, you're required to work full-time when you are on OPT. Otherwise, you would be accruing unemployment time. So if you are going to do volunteer work, it would have to be more than 20 hours per week to count as true employment on OPT. You cannot do volunteer work at a company while you are waiting for your EAD card, though. Keep in mind that volunteer work is actually a special type of work, and for example, if you are working at a company and everybody that is doing what you are doing at that company is being paid, that cannot be characterized as volunteer work. So if somebody is doing a job in the same place you are and they are getting paid and you are not, that is not volunteer work. So you need to be careful there too. So you can volunteer, but it needs to be full-time, and it needs, of course, to be related to your studies. And you cannot volunteer while you are waiting for your EAD card. If, for example, after you get your EAD card and you're doing the same job, you start to get paid. Part of this is something you need to know, and then also the employer has their obligations to not employ you inappropriately or illegally in the US. So you need to be very careful, but you can volunteer as long as it's full-time during your OPT. Another common question is whether or not you can travel while on OPT. So in the United States, no problem. You can travel anywhere within the US. Just make sure you have your immigration documents with you when you're traveling outside of the Lubbock area. International travel is a little bit more concerning. You do not travel outside the US. You should not travel outside the US without the following documents. You will need a current I-20 signed for travel by your international student counselor. That's called a re-entry signature. You'll need that. You will need the EAD already. You need that in hand if you're going to leave the US. Before you leave, you wouldn't want to leave until you had your employment authorization document in hand. And then you also need a valid visa stamp in your passport to re-enter. If you're going home, you would not want to go home unless you had a visa to re-enter the US if you are on OPT. And then finally, it is best also to have proof of employment so that when you return, and remember, it's after your program that you're returning, so you have your EAD, your signed I-20, your valid visa, but you also really don't want to travel, or you shouldn't travel until you also have proof of employment. So this is an employment, a letter from your employer, some paychecks, etc. Travel and re-entry to the US can be very risky when you are on OPT, so you only want to travel if you have all of these documents to return to the US. Otherwise, you risk not being able to re-enter. Because remember, after you finish your degree is when you start your OPT, so the only reason you have to come back to the United States is if you are already authorized to OPT and for OPT and you have a job, or you will be questioned at the port of entry. So if you're traveling the U.S., no problem, just bring your immigration documents. If you're traveling outside the U.S. and borders, and this includes Canada and Mexico, you will want to have all of these documents, or you probably should not travel during your OPT. Can you study while on OPT? Now, some students ask this question. You can take a class or 2 classes perhaps. It depends, but usually they should be recreational or something that's not tied to a degree. Otherwise, no, you wouldn't want to study. You cannot really begin a new degree when you're on OPT, because the school that you will be attending will need to issue you a new I-20 for that new degree program, and that will cancel your OPT. So during your OPT, you can study, but you cannot begin a new degree program. Can you change your mind once you have applied for OPT? Well, students need to be very careful about that. OPT applications are difficult to cancel, so you need to plan very carefully and make sure that you are going to be graduating that semester and you really want to start OPT before you send that application in. We usually advise students to apply for OPT as soon as possible, but in cases where you're uncertain, you may want to put it off a little while before you apply, because it is difficult to cancel OPT. So you probably need to wait, but not too long if you're uncertain, and apply as early as possible. But canceling OPT is a bit difficult and can cause problems, and then you also lose the fee that you have sent in for that OPT, and it's not inexpensive. So there's an application fee that you need to send in. So you need to plan and apply as early as possible, and you can change your mind, but you should avoid that if at all possible. So after your OPT expires, so you've applied for OPT, you've been given 12 months, you've been employed, and now you're nearing the end of your OPT, what to do? These are some of the things you need to know. So within 60 days after the end date on your EAD, you need to make a choice. You can either choose to leave the country, or if you would like, you can start a new program at a new school, but you will need that school to issue you that new I-20 for the new program. Or you can apply for a change of status. Many of our students apply for OPT, and during their OPT, their employer sponsors them, and they work with their employer, and they send an application in for example, an H-1B work visa, and you apply for that change of status. You need to do that early, though, so you can apply for a different immigration status. You can also choose to leave the country, or you can get a new new I-20 for a new degree program at a new school, or again at TTU. So if you have a bachelor's degree and you apply for OPT, you then could start perhaps a master's degree, and you would be issued a new I-20 for that purpose. In this slide, I will talk to you about what is called cap-gap extension. This applies only to students who are on OPT, who are F1, and want to make the transition from F1 to H1, which is a type of work visa. Now, if that's not relevant to you, then this won't be of interest, but many of our students make a transition, or would like to make a transition, from an F1 visa to what is called a work visa, H1. It's a type of work visa. And you do that through what's called a cap-gap extension. So cap-gap extension provides an automatic extension from F1 to H1 status. And it's helpful because sometimes often there is a gap between when your F1 OPT stops and when the H1 work starts. And you you can fill that gap. So if there is a gap, and let's just give you an example. So let's say your OPT ends in July. Typically H1s, because of complicated reasons, starts in October. So you can fill that gap through this provision that's been made. And that would mean that you could work from July until October when your H1 starts, and after your OPT F1 EAD stops. Again, this is only relevant to students who are on F1 and are going to be having the opportunity to change to an H1 work visa. In review, here are some key points to remember about OPT. First, it's very important that you apply early. Remember, this is a government agency you are sending your application off to, and they can take quite a long time to process your application, so apply early. You have 90 days of unemployment during your 12 months of OPT. You need to keep that in mind. Your job must be related to the degree you just completed, your major. And then finally, during your OPT, you have some very important reporting requirements. So be sure to report your OPT employer information and your change of home address in the SEVIS student portal. Thank you for watching this presentation. Please check our website again for additional information after you've watched this presentation. You need to gather all of your documentation based on that information on our website and do all of this. Watch the presentation, review the information on our website, and gather the application materials before you make an appointment with your international student counselor. It's important that you do these things before you make your appointment so that you avoid any need to make multiple trips and have multiple appointments with your international student counselor. We're here to help and to serve you, and thank you for watching this presentation, and we wish you the best as you finish your degree and go on to participate in employment opportunities on optional practical training.